Yesterday, authorities watched guard as one of the suspects unearthed the shallow grave of the 13th body, a 14-year-old Mexican bound, gagged, and executed. Today, authorities had hoped to bring in heavy U.S. equipment to completely dig up the Santa Elena Ranch, but the equipment never arrived. Authorities say that insurance problems are part of the reason that the U.S. equipment did not pass through this border stop. They say that the owners of the expensive earth movers were concerned about leaving their equipment in Mexico unprotected overnight. In the meantime, authorities continue their search in both Mexico and the United States for two key suspects, Sarah Aldrete, the cult godmother, and 26-year-old Cuban-American Adolfo Constanzo, the suspected ringleader. License plates on Constanzo's 1989 Mercedes traced to the Brownsville address of suspect Serafin Hernandez, already in custody. Today, U.S. Customs agent Orrin Nex said Serafin Hernandez has admitted to killing one of the dismembered victims, identified for the first time as Gilbert Sosa, a U.S. citizen from the Brownsville area. Nex says Hernandez executed Sosa following a botched drug deal, that at least 3 members of the Hernandez family are linked to these cult slayings and were already known to authorities.
But the actual family involved in this have records that go back involving narcotics back to about 1977, I believe.
And kidnapping?
There was, late last year, the Cameron County Sheriff's Office did handle a case involving some abductions or kidnapping involving some members of the Hernandez family. They were all drug-related.
Residents living near Serafin Hernandez's house say they used to see a lot of traffic there.
And you have to pass all those trucks, and I would see men out there, and I was like, gosh, they have a lot of company, you know, and didn't think too much about it. And I wish now I had noted down those license numbers and kept them on file, you know, just to see what was going on.
Authorities say Hernandez, the Godfather, and others used at least a dozen cellular car phones to conduct business, and that authorities are now searching those records for new leads. Shelley Koffler, Channel 5 News, in Brownsville.
He was the one that, through admissions and statements from the people under arrest, he was the one that directed the people to be picked up and sacrificed.
U.S. and Mexican law enforcement agencies investigating the discovery of 12 mutilated bodies in a mass grave at a ranch south of the border learned of the ringleader from the 4 men arrested in the killings.
They adored this Constanzo. We did not get the impression that he manipulated anybody. They were followers, but they were loyal believers in that group.
Authorities say the mutilated bodies were either shot or stabbed with machetes as human sacrifices.
And very clearly they believed that the human sacrifice and the animal sacrifices put a magical shield around them that protected them from evil or harm, even up to bullets.
Among the bodies, that of Mark Kilroy, a University of Texas student kidnapped during spring break in Matamoros last month.
30 miles from his Brownsville home, Mauricio Rodriguez stared in disbelief at the Santa Elena Ranch, at a one-room shack filled with candles and other reminders of the devil worship that ended the life of 21-year-old Mark Kilroy, one other unnamed U.S. citizen, and 10 Mexicans. Outside, a scorched cauldron still holds the remains of what authorities say is human brain matter, animal parts, and blood.
Yeah, I'm shocked what happened over here, and I never believed it.
So far, authorities have unearthed 9 shallow graves, still filled, some of them with human hair, skin, and body parts. They believe 2 more young victims remain buried here, that Mark Kilroy spent 12 hours on the ranch before dying.
They wrapped heavy duct tape around his eyes and forehead and face and his head. They assured him that he was not going to be harmed, that he was not in danger. They fed him some bread and water, we understand, and then one of them ultimately came up behind him with the machete and hit him across the back of the head with it.
Authorities say that the devil worship and human sacrifice practiced here may be a brand of voodoo or black magic that comes from the Caribbean and Cuba, and that the padrino or godfather is a Cuban still on the loose.
We've been led to believe he's from Mexico City, has a residence in Mexico City. We've been led to believe that he has a family in Miami, Florida. We were told that he's of Cuban extraction, he's about 40 years of age, and that he periodically travels to Brownsville.
From a balcony at federal police offices in Matamoros, not far from where Kilroy disappeared, authorities paraded 4 suspects who admit to cult involvement. 2 who say they helped abduct Mark Kilroy on March 14th as he celebrated spring break in Matamoros. 1 bared his shoulder to reveal 6 ceremonial marks, 1 for each person he said he had killed. The suspects say that at one point Mark Kilroy almost escaped his fate at Santa Elena, that he got away but was recaptured by this group of Satanists who believe that the souls of their dead would protect their drug smuggling. Shelley Koffler, Channel 5 News, near Brownsville.
It was like something out of a cheap horror novel, only this time it was real. After Mark Kilroy, 21, a South Texas pre-med student, disappeared on a spring break road trip to Matamoros, Mexico, U.S. investigators turned up the heat on the Mexican authorities. They wanted some answers, and what they found out shocked the world.
Mark Kilroy's life was cut short on March 14, 1989. The UT Austin student was in his junior year studying pre-med. He went on spring break with his friends to South Padre Island in Matamoros. His friend Ryan Fenley didn't go.
About 48 hours before the trip, I backed out because I got invited to go on a snow skiing trip.
The group in Mexico went bar hopping. One friend went to use the restroom and the group was separated.
And that 3 or 4 minute tops is when a truck pulled up, grabbed Mark, and took off. It was a Mexican drug smuggling satanic cult. And they were looking for a white spring breaker that particular night. And Mark was at the wrong place at the wrong time. And they took him to a ranch right outside of Matamoros, which is owned by a cartel, and pretty much slaughtered him.
At first, his friends thought he may have run off.
Mark wasn't that type of guy. He was very well academically, athletically, and just was a good, very well obedient guy, and he was faithful and loyal.
But after hearing nothing, they knew something was wrong. About a month later, there was a break in the case.
And they discovered this ranch right outside of Matamoros, owned by this drug cartel, this satanic cult, filled with bodies.
More than a dozen bodies.
I had a hard time wrapping my young head around it.
Authorities say the cult hoped human sacrifices would protect them from harm.
As it began to unfold and became more darker and more satanic and more evil, we all knew our lives were about to change.
The case drawing international attention. It's a subject of books and movies. As spring break rolls around each year, Fenley hopes to bring awareness, no matter where you're traveling.
If you're going to go into those areas, you better stay in groups. Do not get separated whatsoever, not even for 1 minute. Know your surroundings. Don't stick to your face in that phone. Know your environment. Be alert. Because if your head's down and you're not paying attention, you could be a prime target.
He reflects on what Kilroy could have been.
Mark today would have been a medical doctor. He would have been 56 years old. He would have done with UT. He would have done with med school. He would have a family.
As we prepare for the annual invasion of thousands of spring breakers to our coast, for one professor who now lives in Rivera, this time of year is a reminder of the brutal murder of his dear friend more than 30 years ago.
It was back in 1989 when 21-year-old Mark Kilroy, a UT college student, was kidnapped and killed by narco-sandinistas while spending spring break at the border. Our Bill Churchwell joins us now with that story.
Tonight I spoke with the victim's friend who is recounting that shocking crime and sharing his warning all these years later A warning, he says, still holds true for today's spring breakers.
Wanting to become a medical doctor, that was his intent.
Ryan Finley says next week will mark 33 years since his friend Mark Kilroy vanished during a spring break trip with a group of friends after crossing the border to Matamoros, Mexico.
You know, as the story unfolded, if you remember, it just kept getting worse and worse and worse.
The UT college student was kidnapped off the street, tortured, and sacrificed by members of a cult. His remains discovered the next month on a ranch along with other victims.
Even in the southern region of Texas, they still talk about Mark's death every spring break.
Finley tells me he was supposed to go on the trip, but changed his mind last minute, a decision that may have saved his life.
Because I was so hot on going, so for me to all of a sudden have a change of heart, I just think it was a protective angel overlooking.
Several books and even a movie have been based on the horrific crime.
These are all the original posters of Cameron County Sheriff's Department.
Finley has kept newspaper clippings about the case and often speaks at churches and college campuses about what happened to his friend, all in hopes of sparking conversations about spring break safety.
It's more relevant today than ever before. Be careful of the drug trafficking that's involved, human trafficking that's involved. It's just not a good, safe destination for fun.
While Mexico is open to visitors, according to the U.S. Embassy in Mexico, there is a level 3 travel advisory because of COVID-19. And when it comes to crime, law enforcement has said it's always a good idea to use the buddy system and remain vigilant of your surroundings.
All it takes is one time.
Bill Churchwell, 3 News.
Words of advice. Bill Churchwell, thank you a lot for that.
These deadly kidnappings of Americans in Matamoros triggering the tragic 1989 murder of a spring breaker for the investigator who cracked that case. Mark Kilroy was a 21-year-old University of Texas student when he and his friends booked a hotel on South Padre Island. 34 years ago, he vanished while bar hopping with friends in the Matamoros Party District. Investigator George Gavito tells us that kidnappings have always happened south of our border, but sometimes the public does not hear about it.
They kidnap you, and they a lot of times some of these kidnappings they call and they ask for $5,000. You know, and by 5 o'clock in the afternoon they get their $5,000 and they let you go.
Gavito says he and Mark Kilroy's father, Jim, published a book titled Sacrifice. It talks about what happened through their eyes back in 1989. The two also started the Mark Kilroy Foundation to help propel teens into good careers.
Of course, Fox San Antonio is going to continue to follow the latest developments coming out from Mexico and here in the U.S. You can get our free download app in the App Store. Just search KABB and get those breaking news alerts anytime.
But I had never felt evil the way I felt it that day.
Spring break came with a tragedy 30 years ago that's still fresh on the minds of some in the Valley. You may remember Mark Kilroy. He was a 21-year-old University of Texas Austin student. Kilroy was abducted and murdered by a satanic drug smuggling cult in Matamoros. Channel 5's Cecilia Gutierrez spoke to 2 people tied to that tragedy. They explained how the events played out and how they still have an impact on their lives, spring break, and the Valley today.
Mark was a real nice guy, very friendly, very outgoing, joked around, was a strong Christian.
Spring break is an automatic reminder of a dark time in Ryan Finley's life.
My friend wasn't killed on the border, he was slaughtered.
Now an advocate for tourism safety, Finley last saw his friend Mark Kilroy before a planned trip to South Padre Island for spring break.
And then about 24 hours before the trip, I backed out.
His nightmare started on March 14th, 1989.
It was out of character. You know what I mean? When I say out of character, it meant like Mark and I just walked off and went somewhere.
That Tuesday, Mark Kilroy and his friends would go to Brownsville and walk across the border to Matamoros. They went bar hopping. This is where Mark would last be seen alive.
Mark had been kidnapped right behind him.
There were no witnesses. To Finley and his friends, it was like Mark vanished. Retired professor of anthropology at the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley, Dr. Tony Zavaleta, says a major effort was started in both the United States and Mexico to find the student.
A major effort was made to locate Mark Kilroy, including and the college and college students, and Sarah Aldrete was a leader in posting his picture and messages all around town.
3 weeks later, the border town of Matamoros in the Rio Grande Valley would make national headlines. On April 11th, Kilroy's body was discovered on the Santa Elena Ranch after Elio Hernandez Rivera was arrested for running a routine police roadblock.
And eventually he led them. He says, you know, I know where the guy you're looking for, the spring breaker, Mark Kilroy, I know where he is.
Zavaleta says his life changed on a Tuesday at a city commissioners meeting.
And standing there in that door is George Gavito, Chief Deputy Sheriff and investigator, Sheriff Alex Perez, and what appeared to me to be a Mexican federal police official. And they said, we believe we've found Mark Kilroy, and we don't understand completely what we're seeing, and we need for you to come with us. Can you come with us to Matamoros?
Before Zavaleta could step foot on the Santa Elena Ranch, he knew it was an evil place.
There was clearly a cast iron cauldron in front of it with sticks sticking out of it. And I'm looking over there before I even get out, and I already know what that is.
Kilroy's and more than 14 other bodies would be found on the property. The professor of anthropology studied cults before, but wasn't prepared for what he was about to see.
Empowered it with blood and all manner of horrible things. There was a foreboding, and the hair on my arms just stood up, and I mean, I was watching like what is going on here? Evil.
Kilroy's murderers were later identified as Adolfo de Jesus Constanzo and Sarah Aldrete, a student at Texas Southmost College in Brownsville.
Exactly 30 years ago, the spring semester of 1989, I was teaching a class in sociology, introduction to sociology, of about 100 students. It was a very large class. But, you know, it was pretty routine for me. And one of my students in that class was Sarah Aldrete.
The shack and land where these grisly murders happened would be cleansed and burnt to the ground. Zavaleta says these events changed the way spring break is celebrated, and travel warnings to Mexico from the Department of State are looked at.
Because back in those days, in the 80s, before 89, there could be literally thousands of spring breakers making their way, doing the bar pub crawl up and down the main drag there in Matamoros. Thousands. But that dried up. I mean,
even 30 years later, Zavaleta says the impact of Mark Kilroy's death is just as strong. In Brownsville, Cecilia Gutierrez, Channel 5 News, this weekend.
Well, this week marks the 34th anniversary of the kidnapping killing of UT Austin student Mark Kilroy in Matamoros, Mexico. CBS 4 lead investigator Derek Garcia sat down with one of Mark's close friends who has not forgotten what happened.
And it's understandable why Ryan Fenley hasn't moved on from his friend's murder. Mark's death brought to light the narcosantancicios who believed human sacrifices would make them invisible to police while running drugs. We want to warn you, the details are disturbing. This book,
these are actual posters that were in Matamoros,
tells the story.
I'm the only one left that has all the original documents
Of the disappearance and depravity of the killers who murdered Ryan Fenley's friend, Mark Kilroy, after a night of partying in Matamoros, Mexico.
You're seeing something and you're learning something that you didn't even know was even possible on this earth.
Pages of flyers, photographs, and articles recounting the final moments of Kilroy's life when he and his friends left the spring break hotspot of South Padre Island to Mexico and disappeared on March 14, 1989, and killed 12 hours later.
When they kidnapped him, they took him to a ranch. It was considered unlucky to go beyond the 12th hour, and they pretty much destroyed him with a machete.
Brutalized because the cult leader and cartel drug runner Adolfo Constanzo believed sacrificing a smart Anglo spring breaker would make them immune to law enforcement and bulletproof. Kilroy's disappearance led to a joint search, leading Mexican investigators to a ranch in Matamoros. 15 mutilated bodies, including Kilroy's, were recovered. With Texas week spring break here, Fenley's fears of another murder is a reoccurring nightmare.
At 1920, it's just hard to wrap your head around that. When you're, when you see something like this, and so when you've gone through something like this, you see, the innocent part of life that we all know when we're young was taken away at that age.
Mark's mother, Helen, passed away 7 years ago. Fenley believes they're together in heaven and hopes that his friend's story can serve as a reminder to be careful this spring break.
In Mexico City, authorities say the Godfather Adolfo Constanzo and one of his bodyguards was shot and killed by one of his own. According to a Mexican newspaper, Uno Más Uno, Constanzo was killed by his female companion, Sarah Aldrete, just before a shootout with police at this apartment building. Police say 4 men already in custody have identified Constanzo and Aldrete as the ringleaders in a drug smuggling cult. Police say the two convinced their drug associates to mutilate 15 bodies in satanic sacrifices, telling the men conducting human sacrifices would protect them from the authorities. University of Texas co-ed Mark Kilroy was one body dug up on a ranch south of the U.S.-Mexico border near Matamoros. Mark's parents say they would have liked to see Constanzo captured rather than killed. The Kilroys plan to remember their son by setting up an anti-drug foundation in Mark's honor.
Think about it. Here I am, a father. I have to think of my son. He was running, trying to get away. My son was begging for his life. Think about that. Do you want that to happen to your children? Do you want that to be you? That's why I'm doing it. I'm doing it for you.
Mexican police have arrested Aldrete. FBI officials say that will save them from having to extradite her. Aldrete says she is sorry for what she's done.
I'm sorry. If I wouldn't know that it was like this, I wouldn't be in it.
Mexican authorities say 4 others at the apartment were arrested, but 2 remain at large.